All right. So I think I know most of you, but if not, my name's Greg Hodem. I've been here for almost a year and a half now. I've been working on with a client called SDR. The last year and a half I've been here, and SDR, when I first joined, SDR had a new product that was in development. It was a SaaS-based product that primarily is focused on property management for state and local governments who are dealing with blighted properties. And what I mean by that is with the economic conditions, properties that got foreclosed or tax foreclosed, whatever, that go back to the county. All these counties and states don't know what to do with this property. So SDR developed this product to help manage that for the counties. So one of the products, the main product we have is a web-based solution. Its front end is based on EXT.js, which is another Sencha product. Back end is Java, Spring MVC, Hibernate, typical stack there, using Ajax, JSON for the communication. This summer, it sort of came out of a pet project. They wanted to throw out a mobile app real quick for their customers, something that will allow the inspectors to go around and inspect properties and kind of bring up some information about the properties on the site and be able to take pictures of the property and put some basic information about the property. We had a really short deadline on this, so it was like a 3-week sprint turnaround to get something out there. It was sort of needed to coincide with a conference that they were going to in the summer. So that's when we started to look at what was going on. Real quick, survey of what's going on in the mobile world, what our options could be with the time we had, with the resources we had, with the experience we had on the team, and so forth. So basically, this discussion is basically based on that experience that we've had. I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics at the end. At the end, I'll actually show you the product or the web app that we developed for them. So basically, the focus on this is talking about PhoneGap and Sencha Touch. Sencha Touch being the web or the mobile platform, development platform, and PhoneGap being the framework that enables that app to communicate with the native device, run in the native device. So, quick agenda. We talked a little bit about the background. I'm going to go over PhoneGap first and kind of show you how to create a quick hello world kind of a project, kind of show you what's going on there, how that framework works. Then we'll talk about Sencha Touch, the actual, again, framework that enables the presentation, the UI, the mobile app itself. Talk about a little bit about debugging some of these hybrid mobile apps. It's a little different, obviously, since it's running on hardware. It's not attached. You're dealing with emulators and hardware and different devices, and talk about that. Just some useful resources, and then I'll do a demo of the web app, the mobile app that we developed. So just a quick background about mobile development. First of all, how many of you guys have done mobile app development? Hybrid, native, or played with it? Yeah. Okay. So some of this may be familiar for you. So there's like 3 basic classifications of mobile apps that are out there. There's native apps, which you're probably all familiar with. Native iOS, written in Objective-C. Native Android, written in Java, with the Android SDK. Then, of course, we have HTML5, which isn't an app at all, something running on a web server hosted out there, but targeted for mobile devices. And, of course, you've been to these websites. Do you want to look at our mobile version of the website or the full version? And the mobile version looks a little bit more like a mobile app, geared more for that kind of workflow. And then we have a category that kind of fits in between called hybrid mobile apps, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. So, in this quadrant here, I found this slide. The native app, of course, it's targeted for a specific platform. You need to know that platform's SDK, the language, all that, the tool set, the whole 9 yards. Obviously, it's fully capable, and you're going to get the best performance out of that. That's obvious. The lower right-hand corner, we have the HTML5 apps. This is where people want to quickly mobile enable their website. You're going to go to it with the Android browser or the Safari mobile browser. There's no device integration though. You can't interface really with the GPS or make the phone vibrate or anything like that. And basically, it's limited integration. It's not really a fully running app. And then we have the hybrid app, like I said. So that kind of fits in between. What we do here is a hybrid app is really still based on web technology, HTML technology, to run the presentation layer and the logic. But what we do is we wrap it in a native container, and usually it's a native WebView container in these platforms. Like Android has a WebView container object, iOS as well, and a lot of these different platforms. So you're really serving these web pages and these HTML5 technologies still through a web portal, but it's wrapped up in an app running on the device itself. So the advantage to that is now we can access the native capabilities of the phone still. So to some degree, it's the best of both worlds. So why would you choose hybrid? A lot of reasons. For us specifically, we had the time frame. Our developer skills were really focused still on web development. We didn't really know Android or Objective-C, nor did our client want to invest in that at this point. So it was a quick and I won't say dirty way, but a quick way to get an app out there that's fully functioning, integrated with the device, so forth. Why you wouldn't want to use hybrid, and this is a big debate going on out there now. If you've been, native versus hybrid, it's never going to perform like a native application. I mean, obviously. And the other big issue too is because it is performance sensitive still. It's not natively compiled. You have to still think about the targeted devices and their capabilities. And we'll talk a little bit about that later with some of our experience with the Android ecosystem and devices out there. So does that kind of give a little bit of a background? And I don't know if you want to add anything from your experience.
No, I think like you said, most people are going to the hybrid approach because they have the cost factor of supporting multiple platforms. Seems to be somewhat prohibitive.
Yeah.
But there have been cases where some public companies have gone directly just with the native apps.
Okay. So. Well, I'll talk a little bit too about Facebook specifically, because there was an interesting thing that happened with that and Sencha's response on that. Okay, so we'll talk about PhoneGap. So what's PhoneGap? It's a popular web-based hybrid development framework. A lot of you probably have heard of it. It's open source. Well, PhoneGap itself is an open source distribution of an open source project from Apache called Cordova. So actually, PhoneGap itself was purchased by Adobe a couple of years ago. It was owned by another commercial company before that. Again, the core technology is open source and it's called Apache Cordova, but Adobe owns that and distributes it now as PhoneGap. So there's some confusion out there about the names. But what PhoneGap really does is it provides this thin wrapper layer around your HTML5 code that exposes APIs for the devices through JavaScript calls. So we still use the standard web technologies to develop the web app. Sorry, I keep calling it web app, the mobile app. So you're going to use HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, etc. You can throw different frameworks in there. For the most part, it's going to run just like it would in a WebKit browser if you're using iOS or Android. And then PhoneGap also does some of the native app packaging for you. So you'll see in a minute in the demo, it'll actually build out a Xcode project for you ready to go. It'll build out an Android Eclipse project for you ready to go, and other targeted platforms. By the way, I'm only really going to talk in this discussion about Android and iOS, obviously, because they're the two big ones. But it does support a lot of the other devices, BlackBerry, I don't know for how much longer. The Windows devices and some other stranger, Tizon. I haven't heard some of these other ones, but. So to get started, it's really quick to get this to run. Basically, it's an easy install. First you have Node.js install on your machine, and then you're going to use an npm to actually install PhoneGap itself. So this is a Unix command, but to install the framework real quick, just run this command, and then Cordova help to list your help commands. You also will need to still have the native tools installed. So that's Xcode for iOS development, or you're going to have to download the Android SDK from Google's website. The Android SDK, the full download, comes with a bundle Eclipse installation with the plugin installed and everything ready to go. If you already had Eclipse, you could install the plugin manually, that kind of thing, which is what I did. So we're going to go through this real quick, just kind of show how easy this is and really what you're dealing with. So we're going to create this My App project. So I'm going to switch over to the terminal here. Let me just copy the command because I'm not going to type it. All right, so we're going to pull up a command here. I'm in my dev directory, and I'm going to run this Cordova create command, which is going to create my project. Now, the project is going to support the web files, but all the platforms that you want to support under this one project umbrella. So you're going to give your project a name, My App. You give it a package, and then the name that's actually going to appear in the app itself. So when I run this, okay, it created it in the location. So here's the folder that it created. A couple of things to point out. The www directory, so this is where all your web assets are going to go. The index.html, just like a normal website, is the entry point for your web app on the mobile side. There's a couple of files in here that are specific to PhoneGap config, for example. Describes a little bit about the aspects of this application. And then just some of the other supporting files are really there just for the app that initially starts up. The platforms directory has nothing in it right now because I haven't added any platform support. So that's the next thing I'm going to do. So we're going to target iOS and Android again. So to do that, we're going to do a Cordova platform add iOS command. And first I got to go into the directory. There. Okay, so this is actually now building out that Xcode project for me with all the assets, and I'm going to do the same thing for Android. So it's pretty straightforward, the tool set here. Okay, so now it's creating the Android project itself that I'm going to import into Eclipse. So if I go back to the platforms directory, now I see the two subdirectories here. So this is an important concept. So you see here is the Xcode project. You see also it has a www directory in it, and it's empty. You're going to do all of your development, again, because this is sort of this is also cross-platform development for your website. You're going to do all your initial development in this www directory at the root. And when you're done with your development there, you're going to run a Cordova prepare command, or actually build. It does the same thing. And what this actually does is take the contents of the www directory and basically copies it out to the platforms with the platform-specific files added to it. So it's one step you do have to remember to perform when you're creating a new project. Okay, so we went all over that. The next step that you're going to want to consider is now that you've built your project out, really it's just an empty shell. It has no native capabilities yet. This has actually changed a little bit since earlier releases of PhoneGap, so this catches me up all the time. The earlier versions of PhoneGap would include some default native capability with it. You'd have to add like some others, plugins I call it. Now there's nothing there. It's really the lean and mean approach. So what you'll need to do is if you go to the PhoneGap website, you'll see the documentation. You'll see here at the bottom it'll list down here the basic kind of plugins that they provide, compass, geolocation, those kinds of things. And based on the capabilities you want for your app, you're basically going to install those plugins. For this demo, I'm not going to install anything because we're just going to do a hello world. But some common ones, I'll show you this integration later, dialogues for pop-ups and things like that, and camera integration, things like that. And again, don't forget this step because when I was preparing this, of course I forgot it. Nothing's working natively. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that we built out the project, we put the native capability into it, and I ran the Cordova prepare command. I'm going to open up first the iOS project now in Xcode, and for those of you not familiar with Mac, Xcode is the IDE for Mac development, mobile, iOS plus regular OS type of development. It's a little weird to get used to at first, but it's like everything else Mac, right? So at the top here, basically, here's where you're going to pick your...
He means it works well.
No, and I have to preface this, by the way. I'm a real big Apple Mac guy, so I like it, but people that aren't used to Mac, it takes a little while to get used to. So here's the simulators you can pick. So obviously you've got your smorgasbord here of all the devices now, and there's quite a few more recently with the 64-bit. So say I want to run it, I'm going to run it in the iPad with an iOS OS, so that's all picked. So really all I have to do now is just launch it, and it's going to compile the source for me and everything. And build succeeded, and it should kick off the emulator. There it is. It's super huge because my resolution is really low. But basically, that's what you're going to see when everything's successful after you've installed this. So this device is there to kind of tell you that the native integration is enabled. It's ready to go. But it's kind of hard to show this, but in this resolution. But if I hit the home button, you can see this is a really big, but it's really, it is the iPad. So, and this is the app itself. So it really is running as an app now inside the emulator. Did I miss anything? So
the index HTML was just blank.
Yeah, I should have showed that. Sorry, I skipped this one. Yeah, I mean, index HTML had that the Cordova logo in it, and just the initialization. Yeah, let me open that. That's a good point. Yeah, so inside of here, so just for you, Jeff, I'll launch Sublime. Yeah, basically it's not doing a whole lot here. Here's the body and your image, and the big part here is this app.initialize script call, and inside of that class or object is the actual kickoff of the so essentially what it's going to do is it's going to add a listener for when the device is ready, and when the device is ready, it's just going to tell you that in that the green section there that everything's ready to go, and that basically means that the API has been initialized. All right, so we talked about that. So we did the native iOS packaging. Now Android's a little bit, everything on Android's a little bit more to do, and things kind of sometimes work and not always. So what I'm going to do for that is flip over to Eclipse. And what we do here is we're going to import a project. Now this is of course after I've already installed the Eclipse SDK and the Eclipse, the Android Eclipse plugin, which the instructions are pretty straightforward on the website. So I'm going to import an existing project. I'm going to browse back to that platforms directory, and this time I'm going to pick the Android folder. Everything looks good. And there's my app. So you see here that, PhoneGap actually does generate a lot of these Java classes in this case for you. This is the stub. This is the wrapper part of it. So all those artifacts are created. Really all you care about is the stuff under the assets directory, which again is a copy of this www directory that we've been working with. So none of these files had to be changed. And then let's see. Now I have my Android emulator running. So essentially all I should have to do is say run as Android application. And if all goes well, which it doesn't always. Has anybody developed for Android? Okay, it's a little finicky sometimes, especially the emulator. Okay, there we go. So it ran. So one thing to note about so nothing exciting yet. We'll get into that in a minute. So again, what we did is we imported the project, we ran it. One thing to note is I highly recommend that you use the Intel emulator image. The emulator the Android emulator is slow, even at its fastest, on the fastest machine or whatever. It's doing a lot of translation, I guess. Out of the box, it uses the ARM image, so it emulates an ARM chip, which is extremely slow on an Intel box. So I highly recommend that if you're going to do any of this development, do it under the Intel emulator, and then at the very end, then use the ARM emulator just to make sure everything's working okay. Otherwise, you'll be here forever, literally. Okay, so that wasn't too exciting what we did. What I'm going to show now is I'm going to switch out to another project. What I'm going to do is just show a little bit of the native API integration, just to kind of give you a flavor of that, and then we'll switch over to the Sencha side. Okay, so all right, so I have a couple of different www folders in here. I'm going to replace one with the demo I want to show, so bear with me for a second. All right, and remember, I have to always do this Cordova prepare to make sure I push out the native code. Okay, so I'm going to switch over here. So this is the PhoneGap demo folder or project, and I'm going to show you the code real quick. All right, so what I did is I just took their hello world and just added in a little bit of the native calls just to show you what that looks like. So opening up the index.html, you guys saw that before with the app initialized, but I've added just these simple 3 buttons here just to give a quick demo. The first button is just a standard JavaScript alert. You guys are all familiar with that. The second button is going to call a function on this app object, show alert, which I'll show the code, and the third one is the select picture function. Those two are going to use the native API. So here's the app object itself, and the 2 functions I added, show alert. Basically, this is going to, based on the platform, show a native alert dialog, and you'll see that in a minute. But the entry point, or the object basically that encapsulates all of your native API, is going to be this navigator object. So it's navigator dot whatever capability you're interested in, and then the functions on that. So in this case, it's going to be navigator for the notification package, and I'm going to call the alert function. For the select picture function, same thing, but this is the navigator on the camera package, get picture. So this should bring up the native device's picture selector. That API also supports the camera, although the iOS emulator doesn't have, believe it or not, doesn't emulate the camera, which is kind of weird. So you have to do that really on the device. In this particular case, though, I've specified the source type just to be the photo library. So it'll just pull up the picker. And then it'll return a URL to the caller of wherever the file that they selected, wherever that's located on the device.
So Greg, you've written all this, though, up at the top level www directory.
Yeah, so notice that.
It's been copied down.
Correct, yeah. So I'm not writing anything here. All this API is device agnostic. So, and you do have to look at the, there's always the gotchas on some of these devices, so you have to read the documentation, because it'll tell you for iOS, you need to set the parameters in this certain way. But the API is meant to be device agnostic.
Do you ever have like a if-else thing if iOS do this?
You can. I did not have to do that on the project we did. I know some folks did have to do that. I will tell you though, what I did do is I wrapped all these calls when I did our mobile app in its own object that had knowledge of whether it was running in a device or in the browser, because obviously the browser can't make any of these calls. So if we had our own show alert function that would either call the navigator object if it was in a device, or it would just throw up a JavaScript alert. So I can do a lot of the testing, and I'll show you that later. You can do all your testing in the browser initially, which is really the way you want to do it, and then move over to the device at the end. So that allowed me to do that. Okay, so let's just open this guy up real quick in the iOS first. And where did I put this stuff? Oh, here's PhoneGap demo. So again, here's that same kind of folder structure, platforms. So I'm going to go into the iOS. Is there nothing there? No. What happened? Oh. That's not good.
Refresh. Did you run to prepare?
I thought I did.
touch something so that it knows to prepare?
Should put it there. Yeah, wonderful. All right, maybe we won't be showing that. Yeah, okay, that's weird. That's not good. So I've upgraded to Mavericks, and I'm not sure it's working 100%. Okay, so we're going to run this in an iPhone this time on iOS 7. So I'm going to kick off. Again, it just pushed the www folder assets out there and generated the source code. God, that's so big still. So here's the iPhone now, emulator, and here's my 3 buttons. So the first one, if I click on it, so you can kind of tell it's a native. It's somewhat hard to tell, but you can kind of tell it's a native JavaScript because it's got this index.html. I guess by default, this web view always has the URL of whoever generated the alert in it. But just take my word, this is a native JavaScript alert, because if you look at the native alert, now this is going to use the actual devices functionality. I was able to put the title myself in there and the text. The native select picture, if I click on that, so here's the pop-up, so I can go navigate to a photo and select the photo, and it told me success. So just kind of a little taste of the native integration. If you go back to the API, there's a whole bunch of other things. You know, you got GPS. You basically got most of the device capabilities exposed to you. This was just to kind of give you an idea. So I'm not going to do the Android one, but take my word for it. It's pretty similar. Just a little slower to demonstrate. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background about PhoneGap, I hope. Now, there are some PhoneGap alternatives out there. The first one's not really necessarily a different alternative, but a different way of using PhoneGap. It's called PhoneGap Build. And this is actually a service that Adobe provides. It's basically a zero tool install type of service that's provided by Adobe, where you just essentially zip up that www directory that you have with no PhoneGap tools installed locally, and then upload it to the cloud, and their cloud service builds you out all of these integrations for you, and then you can download basically the asset for the device to your machine. So you could use something like that if you're a Windows developer, but you want to create an iOS app without having Xcode on there. You can theoretically do that. There's a process, and you would upload your certificates and things if you really wanted to deploy it. They would do all the packaging for you on their web service, and then you would come down with the app, and I believe you can use iTunes to install it on a device, as long as you've authorized that device for development. And I'm not even going to touch any of the App Store deployment nonsense you have to do for Android, or even worse for iOS, but it's possible. So there is a free and a monthly plan on that side, so you can play with that. Another really popular one, which actually isn't PhoneGap based, is called Trigger.io, and I know you've used a little bit of this too. We actually set out looking at this first. This is a much slicker set of tools that are provided. It's all web-based tools that you can upload your assets. Again, you don't really have to be on a Mac to do the app development for iOS. They claim that they have a better set of integration, better set of APIs, a richer set. They integrate better with cloud services as well, parse.com, those kinds of things. So they have a lot of that stuff out of the box. So theoretically, Trigger.io would let you create a mobile app even quicker because you've got more of the built-in functionality there. There's no free plan on this. There's a trial, but they have monthly plans. We ended up not going this way because it really, frankly, provided more than what we needed, and we could get everything we needed from PhoneGap with a little bit of pain, as you saw with the setup, but decided not to go this way. Are any questions on PhoneGap before we move ahead? Does it kind of give you an idea at least?
Did you start development on iOS 6 with
Yeah.
PhoneGap?
Yeah.
And how did it handle the iOS 7?
Actually, because that was an interesting question, PhoneGap itself was upgraded for iOS 7 right around the time it was released because the beta and all that stuff was out. The Sencha that I'm about to show we didn't have to touch any of our code. Basically, our app runs on iOS 7 with no changes, basically. Except there's one little thing, and I could show you that there was a tool. The toolbars handle a little differently on iOS 7, so there's a little bit of overlap visually, but it's a fairly easy fix. But yeah, our iOS 7 was migration, or whatever, was painless. So that's a good sign, I guess. All right, so now let's talk about Sencha Touch. So Sencha Touch, how are we doing? Sencha Touch, again, is an HTML5 mobile app development framework. So you're going to develop all your apps in JavaScript. I actually gave, I think it was about last year, exactly at this time, I gave another presentation on EXT.js, which is their other JavaScript HTML framework for more desktop applications in the browser. It's very similar to that, comes out of that kind of development methodology. Basically what they're doing here, though, is they're going to provide themed widgets for the mobile platforms. So your buttons are going to look like iOS 7 buttons. The scroll works like iOS 7. The Android pop-ups look like Android pop-ups. But they're all being duplicated or emulated, I guess, in HTML5, CSS, those kinds of things. So it's not native at UI. It's HTML5 UI, but it looks like it's native UI. And that's actually an important distinction between this and other mobile frameworks, too. It has full support for the touch events, so pinch, scroll, pinch, zoom, all that kind of stuff. It's really good at adaptive layouts and feature detection. It knows it's running on an Android. It knows it's running on an iOS. It knows the OS, so you can make a lot of branch codes. Whoever asked that question, branching in your code based on that. Although the framework itself, the MVC framework, supports that natively, and I'll show you what that means, where you can encapsulate your phone code in a certain class versus the tablet code, and it'll know which one to pick. Then there's this, the kitchen sink is a good place to go to kind of see the capability. So, for example, this is just the desktop UI that they have, but if I want to switch over, just say I want to look at what it looks like in iOS, so this will be iOS 7 look and feel. Yeah, this looks pretty similar if you see the user interface, sliders, those kinds of things. And then very easily I can switch over if you want to see what that looks like in Android. Same code, just a different style and style sheets and things applied to it. But looks more like the Android type of look and feel. So, and you could even do other, more obscure. Well, I don't know if anybody's a Windows mobile platform, but IE10. So that you're saying. So it's again all the same code, just applying different styles basically to it. So similar to EXT, there's a built-in MVC system in here. This is becoming popular now in the JavaScript framework. So you have your model, your view, and controller all on the client side, which is a good thing here because that's all you have now. There's no back-end web server anymore. It's running on your mobile device. Again, the API is similar to Sencha EXT.js. If you've used that before, I say similar, but it's not the same, exactly the same, and that actually catches me up sometimes. Since this came after EXT, they improve things, but it kind of confuses you sometimes if you go back and forth. But the API supports a class system, so object-oriented type of class system supporting inheritance, dependency loading, injection, mixin, so you can have multiple inheritance, various configuration options. The license for Sencha Touch actually is free, even the commercial license. So I think at least at this point they're want to get traction on people using this framework. So it both has a free and open source, commercial and open source license. But both are free. Talked about performance a little bit earlier, but just reiterate it again. You're running. You have to be careful about what your targeted devices really are. So there's so many Android devices out there. Older Android devices running 2.x type of Android OS all the way up. So the richer your UI is, and this is actually true for any HTML5 app, but I'll just mention it here. The richer your UI is, or the more components you use, the slower your app could get. So you have to be conscious about that when you're using any framework, especially if you're going to want to support the full ecosystem of devices. Now, we were lucky on our project that we sort of knew that it was going to be used on tablets, first of all, which usually have better processors and sometimes GPUs to accelerate. And we were able to influence our clients, towards certain, basically Apple iPads or what are the other ones, Asus tablets and things like that had better capability. But you have to consider that when you use any of these types of frameworks, and that's true for mobile hybrid apps in general. So I know on the Kona side, you guys had some experience with this, especially with Sencha Touch, and I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, well,
I don't want to paint. I don't want to. I'm not the poster boy for Sencha Touch, so I want to be, honest about
I think
its capabilities.
They were pushing the limits a little bit with Sencha Touch and ran into some performance issues, so they decided to back off and go with. I guess the fallback was just Angular.
Just Angular.
Did they use it? Did they wrap it in PhoneGap still?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Still wrapping.
So, the basic is your mileage may vary with these kind of frameworks. So I put together a quick demo app here for Sencha Touch. And let me just switch this out. Just kind of show you quickly. So it's the same thing here. I'm going to do Cordova, prepare. Just going to push out this new code to the www folder.
Is there an implicit clean of sorts when you do that?
Just think of the same.
Probably.
Is there any remnants around, right? And you just copy over it, but you've got something out there that.
Sure, there probably is in here. I mean, theoretically, I think you could blow away the directory too, so you could script that. It's interesting. Before this version, I had to do all this manual with just links, symbolic links and things in the folder. So they've kind of improved this a lot, although I still forget to do it every once in a while. Okay, so the www directory now contains the Sencha Touch demo. I'll go over those files in a second. I just want to demo this real quick so you kind of have an idea of what this looks like. So I'm going to run this in iOS emulator again. We're going to run this on an iPad. This time I'm going to pick an older iPad. So you can see here how your development, though, is gotten more complicated already, just because you got to now consider all the devices that you got to test on. Okay, so here's a simple app that I developed in a couple hours. Basically, all it is it's making an AJAX request for a JSON file that contains basically a user directory, kind of a directory thing. And those names are rendered here on the left-hand side. When I click on it, it's going to show me the user's detail here. Nothing exciting, but it shows you some of the inbuilt capability. So I can use like the whatever they call this, the phone book kind of thing, where you can click on it, the Rolodex thing, to scroll through. You see that when I scroll, it's the accelerated scrolling or friction scrolling, whatever they call it, and it looks like an iOS app. So what I can do real quick is shut this down, and I'm going to just switch this out now for an iPhone. So I just changed the device. I didn't change the code at all. And hopefully if this works. Okay. It's coming up. So now you can see the app's a little different. I only see the, because the real estate, it's a phone, right? I only see the user list on the first page. But when I select the person, it scrolls over to show me their details, and I have a back button. So the framework detected that it's running on a phone, and it switched out basically the view components, the view template, based on the device automatically for me. But all of the other classes, the store, or the model that's being used for this, they're all the same. So it's pretty easy to develop for multiple device types.
What was the first time that you picked?
That was the iPad.
Oh, okay.
So the last one on here is just the Android. This one sometimes a little finicky. So if all works well when it deploys. So basically what it's doing now is it's just pushing the app out there through a debugger channel. Installs the app for you and then runs it. So it should pop up in a minute. You can see how much slower things are when you do Android development. And this is not a bad laptop either. So, all right. Well, while that's happening, so let's look at some of the files that were involved in that. So again, here's my www directory, and my index.html files changed a little bit, because now I'm going to launch ext.js, and we use, basically they have a what they call a micro loader, which bootstraps the app for me. And essentially what it's going to do is, after it's done loading itself, it's going to run your app.js. Okay, so this is your entry point for your application. App.js is going to describe the characteristics of the app, what kind of classes it requires. So I want to use the message box, for instance. Here's what I was talking about before, the two profiles that I want to support. I want to support phones and I want to support tablets within the same app. So I'm going to list that here. And then other characteristics like the icons that I want to show at startup and splash screens and so forth. What happens at this point is the framework then, based on the device that it's running, is going to choose a profile. Okay, so I have created these two profiles, one for tablet, one for phone. And these profiles are nothing more than classes that have an isActive function or method on them, that when you return true, it tells Sencha Touch, this is the styles that I want to basically use. So you can develop your own profiles, or as many as you need. So here, I'm going to use the tablet profile if I'm a tablet or desktop. If I'm a phone, I'm going to use the phone. So you see then it also has a launch function. When I'm in a tablet, it's going to launch my tablet view. Okay, and then when I'm in the phone, it's going to launch my phone view. So let's say we're in the tablet. So you see that the code for, and this is similar to a lot of ext or Sencha development, the code that you're writing here is a lot of anonymous objects and properties. Basically, there's telling ext which classes you want to use to render different parts of the UI, how you want it to lay out, so forth. You can add in functions that you want for callbacks and behavior. So this is a really simple, it does get more involved in this, but this is a real simple layout for the tablet. And what I'm saying here in the config is that I want everything to lay out horizontally, which is the HBox layout. And the first item I want is the toolbar that goes at the top. And then I want to lay out a person list, which is on that left-hand side, and then the person detail, which is on the right-hand side. If you look at the phone, it's a little different. Here I only want to see, on the initial panel, I only want to see the person list. This is using what's called a card layout, which is you're showing one panel and then you want to switch it out for another, so something like that. So the first item would be the person list, and then when I switch it out, I'll switch it out with detail, with the person's detail. So those two panels are actually down here. So we'll do the person list first. So this person list extends a class that's part of ext called ext.list, kind of self-explanatory. I want to list something. And in its configuration, the important part is I'm going to configure the store. The store is the client-side collection of the rows or the items that you want to display for this list. So this is starting to get similar to other MVC frameworks. So if I open up the store, you see here that I defined a class called person store. It requires a model, and it's the person model, which makes sense because I want to show people. And here's where I declare that. And then I can declare other properties, how I want it sorted, how I want it grouped, so forth. And then the last part here is the proxy, and this is telling ext how I want to fetch that data when that panel is shown. So I want to make an AJAX request, and the URL is just to this people.json file. So this is just a static file, but this could be, an actual live URL sitting somewhere, a server running Node or something like that. And then the model itself is nothing more than a declaration of the fields that are going to come back in the data, and optionally the data types that those fields are. So this object is going to represent your data. It's going to do some of the type conversions for you and formatting for you. So that's the list. And then the detail itself is really just what they call a container, which is the most basic UI component in ext. It's just rendering HTML, for the most part. It's a class that wraps up rendering HTML in a div, basically. So here I'm just declaring a template that's going to show that all the users' data, and they have a templating language. It's just sort of like Mustache kind of template, where they could just plug in the record or the data that you're showing in there, and that displays it on the panel.
A few things for clarification. So
yeah.
That template could be an external file, right?
It could be.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to, and then you mentioned
external file that's bundled with the mobile app.
Right, external,
yeah, sure.
Not HTML in the JavaScript
right.
code. And then you mentioned store and model, and the difference there, the model is the definition of the object, and the store is because
the collection of those.
The collection of those has to keep on the device. Does it actually deal with caching as well?
It can do caching. You can actually read and write the store to the local data store as well. HTML5. What do we call it? Browser store or the data store.
Right.
It can support that. Local store. Thank you. Local storage. But it's basically the client-side collection of the data, and essentially you're going to use that for a lot of lists and things.
And then ext.js first, Sencha Touch. What we've been looking at is what? And
this is all Sencha Touch. So, but
so Sencha Touch uses all the ext classes like ext define.
They prefix everything with ext, and that's another confusing thing. And this is why two classes from from Sencha Touch and ext.js may have the same name, but they have a little bit different functions on them. I know they shouldn't have done that, but yeah, that's why it's still prefixed with ext. They do share a common set of core classes that truly is common between the two, like DOM manipulation and those kind of basic things. Those are shared between the two, but the UI components, essentially what they had to do is the Sencha had to strip out or slim down on a lot of the capability that you probably would never use on a mobile device. That's there though for a desktop type of functionality to make it leaner.
And then any of the native functions. So if you wanted to make call an alert, that has nothing to do with. Does it have anything to do with Sencha Touch, or
no?
Really calling?
You basically at that point, I'm not showing that here, but I can show you in the mobile app. But basically, you would use that navigator object again. So we're going to initialize that PhoneGap object, right? Like I showed you before, and then you can essentially use that navigator object anywhere you want in the Sencha Touch API. So there's no.
So like the person detail in one of your files, you had to scroll back because on the iPhone.
Right.
It was the iPhone.
Yeah. So there's a back button. Right. So here, here you see this is the button for the back, and the handler is just a function basically.
And is that PhoneGap?
No, this is still all inside of. This is all the UI is all inside of Sencha Touch. So and then they do the animation. You can see here they call animate active item. So that's doing the slider and things like that. That's where you want to start to be careful about overusing those things when you're talking about performance. You don't want to, like any good web development, you don't want to abuse those kind of animations. So then the last part is the controller, and so essentially what happens is your view is going to emanate events. So for example, on the list, let me see where. Oh, actually, I didn't have to do it. So on the list, what I'm going to do in the controller is I'm going to say I want to listen for events on the person list. So I'm going to reference the person list by name. And on that person list object, when it's rendered, I want to listen for events, item tap events. So there's a whole list of events you can have. This is where you can do your pinch and all that. And when I hear that item tap, I'm going to call my on item tap. So this is basically putting your behavior logic into the controller, separating it from the UI. So again, I can have my UI render differently, but handle the events similar, or depending on I can actually have controllers specific for the phone and the tablet, because there are cases where the behavior should be different. So you see here that this is the base class here for the controller, which is I'm not really doing anything on item tap. If you notice, for the phone, I am setting the data on that second panel, and then I'm sliding over to it, because remember, I have to transition over to that. It's not seen right away. But on the tablet, because that panel's already there, all I have to do is set data on that panel. It's already there. So
you got to develop both these files independently.
What's that?
You have to develop both of these separately.
You do. Yeah. Well, yeah, you do. I mean, you don't have to follow this methodology. I would highly recommend it. Yeah, because if you cram everything in the same controller, then you're gonna have a lot of the branching logic we were talking about. So this eliminates that branching logic. So I know that was like a quick overview, but it gives you a flavor for how quickly it was to develop something like that. Obviously, you can get a lot more complex and integrate in a lot of other frameworks or API and start using the native components. Any questions on that?
I think I'm still struggling a little bit with the difference between where PhoneGap comes in and where your Sencha Touch or your framework.
So PhoneGap just gives you that wrapper to create an app that will render your HTML5 app, web app or mobile app inside of that wrapper. So it doesn't give you any framework to develop an application.
Okay.
All they do there, remember that initial index.html, that's really just the hello world. It works. Have a ball. So from there,
it looked like you were It looked like you were calling APIs off of that app, like you were calling your own terminal. You get a handle, and then you were doing something different for
that's the navigator
device.
Object. Right?
Navigator object is the navigator object.
That's PhoneGap.
That's part of PhoneGap.
So there is APIs as part of PhoneGap. There are APIs.
True.
It's the API to the native.
It's the API to the native, but they don't give you anything in terms of rendering your UI or handling.
You could render it through that, but then you might as well be doing it native.
Yeah, and that's true. They do expose native panels and things like that you can use. So some people have developed apps that way as well. In fact, that's one of the distinctions between Trigger.io, and Trigger.io gives you a lot more access to those native wraps, more of those native components for you. So if performance was a concern, that might be something to look at. So basically, it's like you have to bring your own framework, if that makes sense. You have PhoneGap just gives you that wrapper. Okay, now I can run it inside of the device, and I can access the device's capabilities. But now you have to bring your framework. So you can bring jQuery mobile, for instance. You could use that. You could use Sencha Touch. You can use Angular. I mean, basically anything. You could use, just render a really stupid, plain HTML app using standard, no framework if you want. So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So we just happened to use Sencha Touch again because we were using EXT. It was a natural step for us to just use this framework. It was quick, 3-week thing, remember? But we could have picked other frameworks just as easily. All right, so debugging the mobile apps. So one of the things you're going to do, since it still is an HTML5 app, is you're really going to do all your initial development and debugging inside of a browser. So in this case, we use Chrome. So you're going to do most of your testing and layouts and stuff like that in the browser initially. I gave you that tip already about wrapping up the PhoneGap API in some sort of shim object, or some wrapper object that provides you the direct access to the PhoneGap API, or just a shim if you're running on a desktop versus a mobile device, and that allows you to do the debugging again better inside of the browser. The Xcode and Android tools, they also provide basic logging. This is where you got to get back into sometimes console.log debugging. Debugging isn't that great in the hybrid world. Always, though, test your app in the actual physical targeted devices. Don't assume that if I tested it on this one Android, it's going to work on all Android. For a lot of different reasons, it could be different iOS, different OS, different capabilities of the device, processors, and so forth. We also noticed that when we were doing our testing, things we weren't thinking about initially, like the user loses their Wi-Fi connection or mobile connection quickly and then gets reconnected. Well, how do you handle that in your app? You're not going to really see that in the browser when you test it, but you have to deal with that on the mobile app itself. If for example, you had a photo and the device is already full, how do you handle all that kind of stuff? So you got to still think about that. And then there is a tool that I use and a lot of folks use called, this is a different, I think you call it Winery, is the way you say this, the Web Inspector Remote. And Trigger.io also uses this tool. It's kind of where I got that initially from. What Winery does, here's a screenshot of that. What you do with Winery is you inject a small piece of JS into your mobile app itself, and then there's a server component that runs outside of the device. And essentially what that small shim JS does is it's sending the events from the mobile device to the server, allowing you on the left-hand side, that's actually Winery, which looks very similar to the WebKit or the Chrome debugger. So you can see the events that are happening on the device. You can see the DOM and all that kind of stuff from outside of the device. This is really critical, especially at the end of your development when you're getting ready for packaging. Some things just aren't quite working on the device, but you can't emulate that or you can't simulate that in the browser. You're going to have to start to do something like this. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, no.
Have you used anything else? Did you use this? Or?
Yeah, no. There seems to be now in all of these types of products, there seems to be this remote debugging possibility. So
yeah. Yeah. So this is one way to do it generically or not tied to a specific SDK. Okay. So this is, yeah. So do we have 5 more minutes? Is it?
As long as people if they want to go.
If you want to go, that's fine. So yeah, the last thing I just wanted to show you. Yeah, I did ask. So this is the last piece. I just wanted to show you real quick what we actually did. Real world. Thanks for coming. Real world example. This is again the client that I work for, STR. This is the mobile device. We actually have this running on the App Store. You can download, but you really can't do anything without a login for. But again, it's this property management software. So just a real quick thing too. This aspect of mobile app development, which I didn't cover at all, is not fun. Deploying it. This was actually, so just a word to the wise. If you're planning to deploy a mobile app, more so on iOS, but even on Android, don't guarantee a schedule to your manager that the app will be available on this day. Just don't do it, because we had to follow all the 300 and some odd rules. There's a whole list of what you can and can't do, and our app got rejected. And it got rejected because I don't remember, some stupid wording we had in the description that implied that we were charging for a service that circumvented the App Store. Something like that. I don't remember specifically. And they rejected us for it. And unfortunately, it takes 5 days to get the apps approved. So once they reject it, it goes back into the queue and it takes another 5 days to go through. So it took us 10 days just to get this out on the App Store. So word to the wise, just be careful with that.
Is Android more difficult?
It's actually a lot. It's obviously it's easier because it's no central So that you should be able to get that out in a day or two. Even the certificate, it's kind of like with you gotta sign up for the app developer, the iOS app developer thing and all that. I think you get a self-sign. I didn't do the Android deployment. The other guy that works there did, but so it was a lot easier for him. He was done, and we were still. What's going on? All right, so real quick, I'll just pop this up in the emulator.
So this development you're showing us is
This is the real deal. Yeah,
people development multiple,
Yeah.
not just you.
Yeah, well, you know the story on that. So, and actually, well, Suresh helped a little bit, but yeah, it was primarily me. I'm going to put this on a smaller iPad. So this particular app now, this is actually going to make AJAX calls and JSON calls to a real server that's sitting out there. That's our development server, but this is using the same API as our desktop app because they're both based on that paradigm. So I should be able to log in here. So you see it pops the keyboard up. This is too where it gets a little different when you do testing. You want to make sure that works with the. All right, so I'm going to search. Just do a search. So here you see that kind of the same idea. The list here brings in the property photos. If I click it, it shows me on the. So obviously there's Google Map integration going on here. So that was easy too because I could just pull in the Google API, the JS API, and just use it as is. So I select the property, it shows me where it is on the map. It's infinite scrolling, so you see that when I hit the bottom, it loaded more. So that's part of the framework. I have more advanced search here, so you see kind of how it slides down. So they could fill in a lot of other details that they want to search on. If I click on the details for a property, it brings me over into the details panel. This again is that more or less that template, HTML template. Yeah. Oh well, I have a funny story on that one at the end if you want to hear this. So here's where I could add photos. So now native integration wants to access my devices. So I select the photo. So use. So now it's actually that actually uploaded to our server. So it's real integration. Can delete it. For whatever reason, they don't emulate the camera, which the Android one does, which is kind of nice, even though it just kind of gives you a moving picture that you could take a picture of, but it's nice to be able to test that. You can add notes to the property, things like that. So again, this was targeted more for the folks that have to go out into the field and just kind of verify that the property condition looks correct. It's meant more still for the back office staff, not the public. So we have a plan to put another similar app to this available for the public, more like Zillow kind of a thing, where it would be a little bit flashier and focus more on the real estate aspect of it. So anyway, the one thing that didn't work in iOS, you were asking, was this toolbar.
That's specifically what I was asking.
It overlapped when I first ran it.
The iOS 7 style guidelines changed.
Yeah, they did, and that's true. You actually, I don't know if you noticed, this isn't using the iOS 7 style. That's the one thing we haven't done yet, but I could switch that out easily. And then I have to publish the app again, so it's another 5 days to put it out there. So that's I guess that's it. I know that was a fire hose, but I guess the point, some useful resources if you want to take. I'll put the slides up.
Yeah.
The whole point of this was just to kind of get you an idea of what it's like to do development for PhoneGap, not to give you all the details, so you guys can, start doing this stuff. And it's, it's pretty quick and easy to start off a project like that. That's it.
Do you need the developer license to be able to do the PhoneGap stuff for iOS?
No, you can do, as long as you have a Mac and Xcode, you could do all the development in the emulator without any developer license. When you start to need the developer license is when you start to deploy it to a real device.
Okay.
And then what happens is you only get 100. Basically, you get a limited certificate for that, and you literally have to register each of your devices with Apple. So it's got your serial ID.
Okay.
You're only allowed 100 devices, which is fine for most teams, right? But there is that whole aspect of it. It's crazy, the whole what do they call it? Provisioning and all this kind of But then set aside a lot of time for that.
If you get the more expensive license, then it's unlimited. That's like
any developer license, you get 100 devices to test on. But you'll get another certificate that allows you to actually post at the App Store, which is unlimited.
Okay.
Yeah. So what the idea there is that you may want to only authorize certain devices to run your app. So you could use a certain developer license to do that, so it doesn't just get out there in the wild. That's kind of how they control that.
I think it just would be the beta testing tool.
Beta testing as well, yeah. So if you want to give it out to a limited number of folks in your office or wherever you're working, you could do beta testing that way, and you authorize their devices specifically so they can't somehow get it onto someone
How do
else's.
they find it? Is it
You
through
send
your
them
system?
the-
Still
send them the
physical.
code.
You physically connect it.
Okay,
Yeah,
got
yeah. That's what I'm saying. It's not.
It's not in the App Store.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's a whole set of tools to do to put the app over to those devices.
I think there's like test flight or something, right? For some. The test framework.
We actually use. I mean, you basically can use Xtunes, iTunes to do some of the uploading. There's a couple of ways to do it, yeah. So it's a fairly involved process.
On Android, it's easy. You just throw up a server with your code and people connect to it. And
Yeah.
Get it right.
Yeah. Like even at home, my son has a what is it, the Amazon, the Kindle.
Yeah.
So that's how I was doing some of my testing there. But it's nice there because you could just drop the .app file right on the device, and pretty much it launches. You don't even need a certificate to do that.
Right.
It's only if you want to put it on the Google Play or an App Store, you need the certificate.